Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's Miles Hopkins here from Agile20Reflect, one of the trustees. And part of the benefits of being a trustee is having a great pleasure of speaking to some of our Agile gurus and Agile leaders around the world in terms of, what they believe is going to be the benefit of the Agile20Reflect Festival, as well as getting to know them a little bit better. And one of the people that I've been following for a long time, somebody that I build their work on the Mobius loop into the enterprise business agility work that I do, is Gabrielle Benefield. So I'm really honored to have you here today, Gabrielle. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I love the idea of Agile Reflect. And it's weird, isn't it? With COVID, it's almost a benefit that we can now get people around the world to join.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. And thanks very much. So, yeah, it's just growing from strength to strength every day. I think we've got over 200 speakers that have signed up now. The events are starting to come in. And it's just getting such great support from the Agile and business community. So, Gabrielle, let's start off just really, talking about what Agile means to you, because you've got people who talk about frameworks and methodologies, and then other people most probably like you and me who talk about Agile as just a mindset and a way of being. What does Agile mean to you, Gabrielle?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think the question I ask nowadays more than anything is why Agile? So when companies say to me, well, come in and kind of either do Agile or make us Agile, to me, I ask them why, because, until we understand what their problems are, what their outcomes are, then Agile might be one way to get there. And although I'm a huge Agile advocate, I think rather than just diving into solution mode, we need to think about the why more deeply. Many years ago, we went on a tour of Japanese companies. So one of them was Toyota, and speaking to Toyota's software at the time was actually not very agile at all, even though we think of Toyota as one entity and the hardware side is very lean. The software side at the time wasn't. And some of the people I was with were like, oh, they should just do Agile. So it was like the solution. I remember Mary Poppendick saying, well, they would never do that because their way is to understand the problems first, then to try things out, experiment, and that becomes the new baseline, the better way of doing it, but you always want to evolve and improve from there. So when I started with Agile, very early Agile, I actually started with XP and then came into all the different parts and lean. We didn't have many books. We didn't have much published. And so you really did have to be experimental. We tried things out, figured out what worked and what didn't, and kept improving. So I think the early adopters almost had an advantage that we could have a lot more room to experiment and innovate. And now that we've got so much great information, but sometimes I wonder if it's at odds with the Agile spirit. So it's leading us into finding the answers being prescriptive. And I suspect that's where a lot of the negative commentary around Agile might be coming from. And I'll touch on something I saw, I picked up around mindset. I've stopped saying mindset because even that word, it sounds like it's set in stone. Whereas we want this adaptive mind. We want a way that we can always keep innovating. So Agile, what it meant to me in the early days and what it is today are very different things. And it's probably why I see a move back. So the Heart of Agile community and others getting to the essence of what it meant, trying to strip back from maybe some of the more prescriptive elements that have entered into it to get people to think through why do they want to do it? What are the essential pieces? And so I never actually, now I go into organizations, I never sell Agile, when they say, we want to do Agile, but why? So I try to get them on the journey. Agile is something that we will probably become because it's essentially based on patterns that we see around getting fast feedback, validating ideas, collaboration, reflection. All these are really good ways of working. However, I'd rather people see that they're connected to solving their problems rather than we impose this existing system on something. So giving people that freedom to innovate is where I see things morphing. I've watched as we've gone through that, crossing the chasm, everybody doing lots and lots of agile, the negative fallback, the sort of bungee cord getting pretty tight around, oh, this isn't kind of working. We're not always getting the results that people want or the changes we want, to coming out the other side, I think, with a bit more maturity around how we really want to think through understanding our own problems and environments and being a lot more adaptive with it in response.
Great, no, great. I really like what you're saying there, because I think, one of the main reasons that I got involved with Agile20Reflect is that what we put into our vision was really to build bridges for the future. Because I think over the last 20 years, we've seen all of these frameworks that have arisen, and, various people arguing with each other about which is the best framework, which again goes totally anti of what the original intent was of Agile. So this whole idea of building bridges for the future and bringing us back to that, and I like the word, the heart of Agile. And I know that there's, a group called Heart of Agile. And we've seen Agile really in very much in the tech space, the software development space. We're starting to see it move into financial services, into healthcare, etc. Where else are you seeing, again, talking more about the spirit of, collaboration and doing things better and quicker with better quality, better flow, producing more value? Where do you see the new opportunities for those types of interventions?
I mean, I think, since the early days, Agile's been in these areas. I remember working financial services very, very early on. But I think it's some of these traditional organizations, it takes them a bit longer to get there. In some countries, culturally, it takes them a bit longer to start adopting these ways of working. So opportunities, I'd say the opportunity is actually now that we're seeing so many people adopting Agile. I don't even think, I don't run across many companies not doing much Agile. It's always slightly surprising when I do. I think more the opportunity is improving the way that people are working, be it Agile or otherwise, that they're not really getting the success. I get many clients coming to me and they've tried every framework. I had one company where they said, okay, hopefully this time will be different. This is, I think it was the 4th or 5th time they'd done a huge enterprise Agile transformation, and they kept bringing in these highly paid consulting firms, different coaches. They tried every different approach. And they said, so we want to do it better this time. And I just looked at them and I said, well, maybe you should stop. Why do you want to keep doing Agile? And they were really taken aback, because I'm meant to be there and teaching them Agile. But I said, look, are we solving the right problems? What's really going on? So that led to a bigger conversation around, let's understand your actual problems and your outcomes, and stop focusing on making Agile a success, because obviously that wasn't quite working for them. They weren't getting the benefits. And I run across so many companies that look Agile, they show me their pretty visual management. They are doing stand-ups. They've got titles and roles and, really all the accessories, but at the heart of it, they aren't getting the results they need. So why keep pushing on it? There's this desire now that Agile is the end state, that's the outcome. And I think that's quite dangerous for us. So opportunities are to actually help people. All of us, I think, were drawn in the early days of Agile, and it's more pure form. There wasn't a lot of money in it, right? You did it because there was a belief, a passion. When I came across it, it was very pragmatic. It made sense to me. It was actually, you find it because you say, hey, that's interesting. It's the way I'm already working. And I was drawn to the people. I was drawn to the collaboration. And but we didn't lose sight of the fact that there were problems to solve. Whereas now people seem to be competing on who's the most agile, who's got the best framework. And I think the community sometimes tears itself, well, not the community, but maybe some of the leaders, they're tearing themselves apart and they're tearing each other down. I saw that very early on. One of the very early, more known agile figures, who obviously won't mention who it was, came to give a talk at my company. And he starts bashing a few of the others as being, all these things wrong with it. And I said, look, these people barely know what Agile is. We're trying to, get them to see that it might benefit them in some way. Tearing people down, it does a disservice to us all. So I really wish as a community we could move beyond that to say, you know, we should be about helping people and we should move beyond the language. But it's like anything where there's money involved, you know, it becomes super competitive. Somehow that as an outcome to make more money, I think corrupts at a great level. And it's one of the reasons when we talk about Mobius later, it's actually an open source approach. I had to do that. It was a forcing function to try to prevent some of those aberrant behaviors. Obviously, things like Scrum and other things, Heart of Agile, and that, you know, they probably are open source, but I think people have made it closed around it because there's money to be made, perhaps. Mm-hmm. That's just my opinion, obviously.
Totally agree with you. And I think that, again, you know, that's what talking about the, you know, building those bridges, because there's just too much infighting that is just making the whole community look bad. And I mean, there was a debate the other day about should we change the word agile to something else? And like I say, well, there's nothing wrong with the word agile. It's the way that the community is approaching it and applying it. That's what the problem is. So if you change the word, it's not going to change the behavior of the people who are, you know, causing the issues. So, you know, totally agree with you. So let's move on to that amazing picture behind you, your backdrop and the Mobius loop. And because one of the things that we also do, one of the things I've always driven is, you know, an integration of all of the sort of activities and interventions that are happening in an organization. So what you would normally find is that, you know, design thinking and product innovation is happening somewhere in the business, and then agile delivery is happening somewhere else, and the two are most probably never really connected to each other. And that was what really drew me to the Mobius loop right at the beginning, was that connection and the continuous iterations around that. So could you tell us, just tell us about the Mobius loop and, you know, the thinking behind it, how it came about, and, you know, where it's being used, and, you know, what benefits it's bringing to organizations, because, yeah, I found it very fascinating.
So, yeah, I'll start with the kind of why. So very early, I guess, early sort of 2000s, I was working at a scale up in San Francisco. So I came in to help them with the product side, ended up running all of technology. And we ended up in a place where the Poppindex, who do the Lean software series, they came in and they said it was the lowest cycle time they'd ever seen at a company. And we did kind of everything right. We had a company called Pivotal, early days of Pivotal Labs, coming in to help us with the technology side. We were both agile, lean, but kind of everything in between. And when we moved to this very fast model, getting product ideas out quickly, far more targeted, every month we used to have a pizza meeting. So the whole development team would come in, VP of product marketing and I would go through what had happened. So in terms of what we'd launched, what the feedback was, where we were getting traction, and we were measuring all of this. So very early sort of outcomes stuff. And it was only right before we were going to go public that we came back from this meeting with the bankers, and the whole team was gathered around where we sat. And they said, hey, what happened to our pizza meeting? And we were like, oh, sorry, you know, this is really important. We were really busy. And they just looked at us and went, fine, well, if we don't know why we're building it, we can just build whatever we want. There's no point. And it was so incredibly revealing that that had become so important to them. We didn't really think much about it. It was just sort of a normal activity, but it turned out that made people think about the why, getting data back, understanding what the outcomes were, and trying to do the minimal amount to reach it. So instead of becoming a feature farm, as many agile organizations do, where they're pumping out lots of features, measuring outputs and seeing those success, we'd moved to an outcome-driven model. We had a common purpose. We all wanted to go public. So it was about obviously getting lots of customers, lots of engagement, increasing revenue, you know, pretty simple. So when I got called into Yahoo, so Ken Schwaber, one of the big Scrum guys, said, hey, you know, you've done so well, can you try and scale this up? And at the time we didn't have big scaling models. I think Yahoo and probably Nokia were about the ones who started around the same time. Went there and they all wanted to be agile. So we ended up with 250 teams globally, all of this. And it really bothered me because it was, you know, the sort of ghetto version of Agile, where you're doing a lot across the organization. Some areas, though, did it really well, but others were just doing it what looked like Agile. And what we'd forgotten, of course, were the outcomes, not because I didn't want to, but I couldn't get the founders and people in a room. I remember accosting one of the founders on the stairwell once going, you need to come sit with us. You need to know what's going on. We need to really understand the reasons. And hey, there's a lot of stuff we should probably stop doing. It's killing the company. It's killing innovation. I think he ran away from me at that point. And, you know, looking back, you can see what happened. You can be doing a lot of Agile. And it was one of the few areas that was pretty successful at the company, but without the outcomes, there's not much point. I then went on and sort of was bringing this in around, well, all throughout the 2000s. And I would talk a lot about outcomes, but people didn't quite grasp onto it. And it was only when I started writing about first Agile contracts after writing a big book on Agile contracts, we actually binned it because we realized it was far too much about making the contract Agile, putting in Agile terminology, and that wasn't the point at all. It was, are we solving the problems for the customers? Are we delivering the right outcomes? So that created a big pivot, because the biggest problem next was that people didn't know how to create the outcomes. And I'd say today, I hear people talking about outcomes and OKRs. Really, OKRs have become the new KPI for our generation. There's a lot of imposed measurement. People still measure outputs, thinking they're outcomes. And so they don't have a way to do that. There's some really brilliant models out there. Tom Gill, Language, a lot of the work he's done, I drew inspiration from it. But I wanted to make it simpler so people could actually access it. So Mobius, I'll just share my screen, guessing I have post. I'll just show you some pictures. I've actually been in the midst of a coaching workshop, so I decided to obfuscate some information and show you direct on screen what we're doing. So Mobius, just simplistically, is, if you can see here, the three parts. We've got discover, options, deliver. Now on the right-hand side, deliver, that's where most of the Agilists live, right? We're coming up with our product backlog in the middle. So options are our potential solutions, alternative approaches to reach the outcomes. And people are spinning around on the right-hand side, delivering a lot of these features. As you said earlier, you'll find people with things like design thinking, business model generation, etc., on the discovery loop on the left, but often they're decoupled. So we're not doing this as an integrated approach. So Mobius has these three parts: the discovery loop, the options pivot, and then delivery. This picture, I hope you can see it. I've just realized I'm on a really big monitor, so I'll read it out for you. Or actually, you know what? Let's quickly modify this as we go. I'm just gonna unlock selection and make these bigger. Okay, maybe that'll help. There we go, yay. All right, so what I find, simplistically, people need training wheels to get started. So the idea of the Mobius Navigator is that it's this idea of structure yet freedom. If you start with it being so incredibly difficult to understand, where, hey, we're Agile, you can do whatever you like, people really struggle with it. So that's why you see things like Scrum was successful in the early days. It gave people enough structure to get them started. So it's not a linear process. It's not steps. You can start anywhere in the loop and move as you want to, but these activities help us gain focus. So for example, whenever someone says we need whatever it is, we need a new CRM, customer relationship management system, we need a mobile app, we need Agile, I always say, okay, great, but why are we doing it? Who are we doing it for? Then I want to get some data. So I want to discover what's really going on. Out of this, we can generate our outcomes. So why outcomes are important is by clarifying and quantifying them, we can get across what we really mean. A good example is people say, I want a user-friendly product, website, etc. And when I say, what does that really mean? It means everything from having a very simple design, making it learnable, to solve some specific problem. It's unclear until we break that down. So the reason we have outcomes is to set the direction of improvement, what we want to do better. So this just gives us the focus. It creates that compass to help steer our efforts. After that, in the decision pivot, what we're doing is ideation. We're coming up with potential solutions. This is where we generate our hypotheses, etc. And then we decide how we're going to validate those. So this is where being fast with feedback, whether you're using some sort of agile, Kanban, lean, doesn't really matter. But what we're trying to do is get that feedback so we can adapt fast. And rather than when you see a lot of these very linear left to right type models, what they're doing is pushing ideas out, but you're not taking the learning. So this is all about the learning. How do you take that learning, feed it back in, and decide whether, hey, was that a good idea or not? Do we need to do more discovery? Do we need to generate new options? Or, yeah, it was great, that experiment. Let's go and actually launch it. And there's a little more complexity with this. We start here to teach people the kind of basic patterns, but where you start in the loop will dramatically change depending on what kind of environment you're in. So for example, if I'm in a highly chaotic environment, something like a pandemic hits, a friend's restaurant, Ricardo's in Chelsea, an agile restaurant, they had to pivot their entire business model overnight. So within 5 hours, they've got a deli supermarket up and running, which means they're actually starting in the options pivot. So in chaos, you want to just do something. You can't wait, right? If you've got an earthquake happening, you need to get to a safe place. You don't sit there going, oh, let's discover where the door is. Let's think it through. You have to react. When you're in a very complex situation, then you have to do more discovery to understand, find out things. When it's a lot more clear and obvious, then you might be far more on the right loop. I often think when you do things like sprint planning and Scrum, that's actually when you say, oh, okay, we've got this. This is fairly clear. So now we're just going to deliver it. So this is to help people get familiar with this. And we've found the people who are most attracted to Mobius actually turn out to be coaches and consultants, because it comes with a toolkit, innovation toolkit. And the idea here is that we all use different tools and methods. So, people have been around for a while. They have things from design thinking, agile, lean UX, lean startup, business model generation, beyond budgeting, you name it. All those frameworks exist. And I think they all have a lot of power behind them. What we want to do is work out for the situation, for our environment we're working on, what sort of tools do we pull out? So you can see this is just a small sample. For when we want to understand problems, we have these frame the problem cards. When we want to understand motivations, you'll see a lot of things from very design thinking. You'll see OKRs, etc.
Yeah, so don't start giving everybody the answers already, Gabrielle, because I think one of the things you and I spoke about is when we do an event in February, which we still got to finalize, that we're most probably be using these cards to ask people to place them where they think they should be.
True. I need to hide that. We'll cut that bit. Okay. I just going to show you this quickly. The one thing I love is this idea of make it visual and centralize it. So this is, I obfuscated some of it, but this is really the end-to-end flow from discovery to delivery. And the other day, this comes from a 3-hour workshop. I got thrown in the deep end with a bank where they said, we've got to create this whole innovative new approach. You've got 3 hours to help us figure it out. So no pressure. And for me, you get that moment of, wow, not my area. Do I really understand that? But using these kind of visual guides, I could quickly get this lots of conversations and meetings that I had laid out. So the idea was, even though you're doing a lot of research, you're going all the way across, getting people to do something. And one of the big things we're looking for is, what can we get done this week? Are there some things that we can actually make progress to outcomes? So yeah, that's the sort of stuff I'm finding personally really helpful, just to be able to frame ideas.
No, that's great. And I can see that working in such a short, especially when you've got the collaboration tools and making it visual and getting everybody participating, I can really see that working well. So yeah, good. That's getting me excited for our February thing. I think I'm just going to ask you one more question, if you don't mind, and it's just got to do with the festival. I mean, what would you like to see in the festival and coming out of the festival? Maybe not a fair question because, it's sort of anything goes type of festival, but what do you think this festival could do to building those bridges for the Agile community?
I think it's creating connections. One of the problems that's coming out, doesn't matter if I'm talking to, my kids' school, business people in classes, what I'm finding is that people are lacking social and they're lacking connection. So I think festivals like this, it's interesting. It's not just one-sided. It's not, hey, this person's just going to talk at you, conference over. It's actually getting a lot of people mixing and in the time of COVID, reconnecting and globally connecting. I find that very powerful. I also like that it is a little more sort of guerrilla style. People can come up with things. And I think people who sometimes get lost in the mix, you get some big name players, you see the same people on the circuits, often in that bucket. But I actually want other people to have a voice. I want to encourage more people to share. While we're talking, I'm immediately thinking, oh, you know what? One of the things I do when I have a class and I get people to start using Mobius, we have this idea to share it back. So for every class, we get people who are using Mobius to come in and show us real time what they're doing. And I'm thinking, actually, that would be kind of cool for Agile Reflect. We should get some of those people out, give them a voice, get them to share their ideas. That's one thing that when I think about Agile and some of the people have helped me along the years, and with Mobius, the first person who really started promoting it was Alistair Coburn. And, there was no selfish reason for it. He just is one of those people who sees something great, puts it out, and he will promote and help you. And I think all of us should be doing the same thing. We need to bring more people up, give them a voice, get them to share their ideas. It's really satisfying to do that.
Yeah, no, agreed, totally agreed. No, that's fantastic. I think those connections we had. I think I told you last week that we had Dave Snowden speaking at our business agility meetup last night, and he was very much talking about the connections and the sort of informal connections, and it was a fascinating talk. Sometimes with Dave you get lost in what he's actually meaning, but last night was actually really good. So I think
Is that recorded, Miles? I'd love to see that.
yes, I'll send you the link. I'll send you the link for the recording.
Yeah, I
But
love Dave's work. I mean, it
yeah,
makes people think. Brilliant.
that does. But I'm going to stop recording now, Gabrielle, and then we can. So again, thank you very much for agreeing to do this for Agile20Reflect. We really, really do appreciate it, and thank you again for being a patron. That's really special for us. And we just love the work you do and love the support you give the community.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.